Okay, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning to our colleagues in the US. It is with great pleasure that we welcome you all to this webinar, which is organized by the Chamber of Commerce and Industry of Thessaloniki. This is the third webinar in a series of 5 that aim to promote Greek exports and will focus on the main FDA regulatory issues affecting Greek exports, putting a spotlight on labeling and advertising of food products and how to manage FDA inspections. First, I would like to thank our keynote speaker, Ms. Shelley Garg, partner at Amin Talati Wasserman LLP, a firm based in Washington, D.C. that specializes in guiding consumer product companies through the FDA life cycle of products geared towards improving population's health and wellness. This includes guiding on strategic development of new products through regulatory approvals to the marketplace, strategic business planning, product development, all post-launch processes to ensure labeling, advertising, safety and manufacturing compliance, and enforcement matters. More specifically, Ms. Garg participates in the areas of food, beverages, dietary supplements, over-the-counter drugs, devices, animal and veterinary products. I would also like to thank Mr. Panagiotis Dermetzoglou, Economic and Commercial Counselor at the Embassy of the Hellenic Republic in Washington, D.C., for proposing this specialized webinar introducing Ms. Garg to the Chamber. Lastly, special thanks are owed to Ms. Anna Beni for the work and effort she has put in for the organization of this event. I would like to invite Mr. Emmanuel Vlachogiannis, the first Vice President of the Chamber, our host, to address the audience. Mr. Vlachogiannis, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Axelifiotis. A very good morning to Arizona, to Shelley Garg. Good morning to Mr. Dermetzoglou in Washington. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, dear participants. It is indeed an honor for our chamber to host this webinar because the US market is a very important market, as anyone can understand. It is also very important for the Greek companies, especially the food and beverages companies who want to enter this market. Of course, the requirements that have to be met are very special, and so I guess that Ms. Garg will provide us the necessary knowledge. As I read from your CV, Ms. Garg, you have your keen insights into FDA and its inner workings have proved to be of significant value for your customers. And I do hope and I'm confident that the participants will have today this opportunity to gain the necessary information and to have a very specific, to acquire a very specific knowledge how to do it. I will pass now the words to Mr. Dermetzoglou for his address.
You can hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Vice President of the Thessaloniki Chamber of Commerce and Industry, ladies and gentlemen, it is a great pleasure to address this select audience today for this webinar regarding FDA's regulations that indeed matter very much to Greek exporters. And first, of course, also I would like to thank Ms. Shelley Garg, partner with Amin Talati Wasserman, for offering to provide such crucial information to Greek interested parties, and to congratulate the Thessaloniki Chamber of Commerce and Industry for organizing and making this webinar possible. On the subject at hand, regarding FDA, as is well known to all parties that engage with this entity, its regulatory responsibility covers a variety of different products, such as drugs, medical devices, tobacco products, cosmetics, food and beverages for human consumption, and dietary supplements. Regarding food items in particular, which is the topic today, this webinar is indeed a great opportunity to discuss certain really important issues related to FDA's authority to regulate these products in the US market, given that the category of agricultural exports is of special interest for Greece. Keeping in mind that the US market is the biggest import market in the world, and the US is an important trading partner for Greece, actually our seventh most important buyer in 2021. It is worthwhile noting that the share of Greek agricultural exports to the total of Greek exports to the United States is approximately 1/4, which is a high share that also has been rising in the last few years, more recently from 21% in 2018 to 27% in 2021. And this is in analogy to the also rising total volume of Greek exports. As a matter of fact, even though Greek agricultural exports to the United States market still face certain non-tariff trade barriers, such as for meats and poultry and for fruits and vegetables. However, these products do not fall under the authority of FDA, but under the authority of USDA, which is the United States Department of Agriculture. In general, Greek exports of food items have very good prospects in the US market. However, while high-quality Greek agricultural products continue to meet rising demand in the United States, it must be said that this same market is one that should be approached in a systematic and consistent manner due to its complexity, sheer size, and particular characteristics, such as, for example, and most importantly, the strong competition from a wide range of imported products. For this reason, precisely, ladies and gentlemen, FDA's procedures, such as for the registration of exporter facilities, labeling and advertising claims, among others, that is, procedures for importing food items in the United States, are very important and must be dealt with carefully to ensure regulatory compliance and successful marketing of these products in the local market without problems in the process. So I will leave you at that. I will leave you to the expert advice of Ms. Selikard. Thank you for your attention. And lastly, however, I would like to wish to all attendees of this webinar every success in their future endeavors in the US market. And please keep in mind that all the offices, all the economic and commercial affairs offices in the United States, that is in Washington, D.C., Chicago, New York, and San Francisco, are always available to assist you in your efforts. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Demetzoglou. Now, prior to giving the floor to Ms. Garg, I would like to kindly ask all the participants to use the chat facility or raise the little hand provided by the platform to address any questions or make any comments. I would also like to inform all participants that the webinar will be recorded, is being recorded, and you will be able to watch it at any time through TCCI's channel on the YouTube. Thanks very much. Shelley, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much to everyone, including TCCI, for organizing a really great event and bringing us all together. And special thanks to Mr. Pano for being here and for introducing, I think, a very important topic. Good afternoon to everyone attending. Today we'll be discussing FDA's regulation of regulated products, and primarily a focus on food, with some mention on OTC drugs and cosmetics. Mr. Pano addressed this, but we'll talk about what Greece brings to the table, our role as FDA Regulatory Council, common US regulatory issues, that are affecting Greek exporters, some best practices for labeling and advertising. We'll touch on FDA inspection tips and also briefly touch on cosmetic and OTC requirements. Of course, as Mr. Theo indicated, if there are any questions, please feel free to raise those and or feel free to contact me directly, and I'd be happy to talk with you further. So Greece is definitely an important trading partner for the U.S. U.S. imports from Greece for essential oils, perfumes, and cosmetics was 40.38 million in 2021. Greece is a leading agricultural importer of various categories and that we use daily, including processed fruits and vegetables, olive oils, and cheese. So it's very important for Greek exporters to continue understanding and having, really no hiccup or barriers in trade to the U.S. market. So our role as FDA Regulatory Counsel is to assist companies in the life cycle of product across all of the categories. This includes foods, beverages, dietary supplements, cosmetics and personal care products, homeopathic products, OTC drugs, and devices. I understand there are some Greek exporters in the areas of pesticides and fertilizers and things of that sort. That is exclusively regulated by the Environmental Protection Agency, EPA. But to the extent it is a pesticide being applied to a food or with a food residue, then both EPA and FDA do have shared jurisdiction. The specific areas that we provide counsel are issues of product development. So, on one hand, the questions are, is my product a food or is it a supplement? Is my product a cosmetic or is it an OTC drug? The common issue or item there is with sunscreen. If you have a sunscreen active ingredient and or a claim, then you are considered an over-the-counter drug and not a cosmetic. So that regulatory pathway is part of our review in the product development stage. It's also looking at labeling and advertising on websites, social media platforms, and physically on the product label. For foods, it's looking at whether that ingredient is allowed to be used in a food product. We also provide counsel in enforcement. So products that are imported and have that are intercepted by FDA and or Customs and Border Protection at the time of entry, oftentimes undergo what's called an FDA detention or refusal. And so we are involved at that first layer of scrutiny in helping companies obtain a release of merchandise if it's warranted. There are also items that FDA conducts, such as FDA inspections. There could be recalls. There are import alert issues. There are investigations if it escalates into a criminal matter. So all of those types of enforcement activities we get involved in. There are also contracts between suppliers and distributors, quality agreements, exclusive arrangements, et cetera. And so we have a team that assists with contract development. And then, of course, post-launch compliance. As you enter the market, if there are issues with the product and or reporting requirements, for example, foods and or devices have obligations for companies to report issues like product complaints or adverse events with the FDA. We can also support in that area. And so our goal is really to serve as a company's regulatory partner in the US market. No company or no issue is too big or too small. Our goal is to really provide that hand-holding and guidance. And through this seminar, really provide some education as to what the regulations are. So some of the compliance concerns for Greek products include a lot of issues on labeling, and that's why today we'll spend a little bit of time focusing on that. In 2022, thus far, there have been import refusals for naming issues, ingredient naming issues for juice products, products that lacked a required nutrition facts panel or nutrition information, There have been issues with format and content of labeling, and then also manufacturing conditions, what we call good manufacturing practices, or GMPs. And so there's some allegations that FDA has made that foods are prepared under insanitary conditions for some great companies. And so those are sort of just the common items that I've observed in assessing compliance issues thus far in 2022. In terms of import alerts, which we will talk about what those represent, but essentially they are items that have made it to a red list where products have been deemed to be violative, and the burden is on the importer or party bringing the product in to show compliance. And there are currently 22 import alerts for a variety of areas, but we just mentioned a couple here: microbiological contamination of cheese, adulteration of honey, foods that contain illegal and undeclared colors, filth, again, a GMP issue, salmonella in foods, and pesticides in human and animal foods. So those are just a couple. I'd like to next kind of discuss how the US regulatory framework works with respect to food products. So we have a variety of agencies that regulate food. Food and Drug Administration, FDA, is of course the primary. You can see that in blue. We also have Customs, US Customs and Border Protection, the circle in black. The Federal Trade Commission, which regulates advertising and labeling primarily. EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, again, will regulate pesticides in foods predominantly, also including tolerances. So if there are any allowable tolerances for pesticides, EPA would establish that. And USDA, Mr. Pano mentioned the agricultural sector. So oftentimes, products that are in the meat, poultry, egg arena will have exclusive jurisdiction by USDA. And then to the extent there are, animal byproduct components in FDA regulated goods. So for example, fish oil in a dietary supplement, or egg white protein powder, in a food product, then USDA will regulate that product and require what's called a veterinary services permit. And so we get involved with that as well. And then you have the local governments like the state attorney general's offices, the counties, et cetera. So that's the relationship for jurisdiction in the US. So this slide just presents an overview of the types of foods that FDA regulates. This really includes most packaged and processed foods and beverages, produce, so fruits and vegetables, seafood products, supplements, food additives, bottled water, infant formulas, and closed-face sandwiches. Now, in terms of foods that FDA does not regulate, it's very specific. Processed food products that contain at least 2% or more cooked meat or poultry, or that contain 3% or more raw meat or poultry, is exclusively regulated by USDA. So sometimes we get questions from companies that are bringing in, for example, frozen pepperoni pizza, from Italy, let's say. And that product contains, small amounts of pepperoni. And if it's less than 2%, then oftentimes USDA will not have jurisdiction. So that formulation is very important. Egg products are also regulated by USDA, and poultry, we said. Now, in terms of the key food regulatory requirements, there are about four or five primary. One, which was mentioned, is food facility registration. So all companies that are involved in the manufacturing, packing, holding of food are required to register with FDA. That registration is biannual. It's every 2 years on an even numbered year. And for foreign companies like Greek exporters, you are required to appoint a US agent. And that US agent is responsible for providing correspondence and communicating to the facility. Now, each of these topics can, we could have an hour-long seminar on each because it can become very, very dense and a lot of questions around, is my facility required to register? Am I exempt? The conditions of exemption. So just know for now that this obligation exists. And if there are questions about your responsibility, we'd be happy to address it. The other area is manufacturing compliance. So that essentially is the standards and quality of manufacture and or holding or storage of a facility. And that is in 21 CFR Part 117. So that's the regulation. You may be familiar with a program called the Food Safety Modernization Act, FSMA for short. That was created now over a decade ago to modernize the food safety system. And it requires parties that are exporting food to the US market to have a very high level of control over the supply chain and quality. In addition, companies in the US who serve as FSVP importer, so Foreign Supplier Verification Program importer, are required to have certain documentation in place. We have to have compliant labeling, advertising, and promotion. This is the first area where FDA can look at a product physically and visually and see what the product is and if it's compliant. So it's very important. It's sort of like a first impression that you're making, to the US market is your product label. So it's very important that that product is compliant in terms of the format and content and also advertising and promotion issues. And then lastly, it's reporting. If there is a food safety concern, there is an obligation to report that through what's called the Reportable Food Registry, or the RFR. And there are certain situations when that is required and when that is exempt. All right, so we'll get into labeling for a couple minutes here. Now, labeling in the US means everything that is written or printed on the physical label or that accompanies the product. So oftentimes we get questions from companies where they say, my label does not make a claim about protein content, but I'm making that claim on my website, or I have an accompanying, promotional material where I'm making that claim. Is that considered labeling? And the answer is yes. Labeling includes everything that is physically printed on a product label and anything accompanying that product or discussing that product. So websites are an extension of labeling. You cannot make a claim on your website that you could not otherwise make on the label. So it's important to make sure that all of those areas are in fact compliant. Now, there are about 6 required elements of any core label, particularly on the food side. That includes a statement of identity. What is the product? And there are ways to identify that product. It's either by common or usual name or a fanciful name if it's not clear. The easiest example is milk, right? We call it milk. But nowadays, in the market, we have variations of that. We have oat milk, almond milk, pea protein milk. And so it's very important to call the product what it's legally defined. There have been issues in naming. So for example, a couple years ago, there were some efforts to question whether oat milk or almond milk should be called milk because it's not truly milk. And so should it be called almond beverage? So things like that become part of the question and review for naming. You also have to have a statement of net contents. So that's usually on the front panel of a label, a nutrition facts panel, an ingredient declaration, allergen labeling. So there's 8 major allergens, wheat, soy, egg, milk, etc. Those need to be declared. And then the name and place of business. And for imported products, you must have the country of origin. So that also can become a legal issue on its own. Each of these areas, we're sort of just touching on it in this session, but each of these areas can become very complex in terms of declaration. What is the proper naming for the ingredients. The country of origin can become its own analysis. If, for example, olive oils are sourced in Greece, but then processed in country X and then packaged in country Y, where is that ultimate country of origin that should be declared on the label? And so that becomes a legal analysis that we undertake. In addition, there are certain permissible claims that are allowed for food products, but they must meet the criteria. So for example, there's nutrient content claims. These often relate to the amount of a nutrient in a product. So for example, a product is free of sodium or high in fat, or a good source of protein. Those are those types of claims that you can make for a food product. There are also health-related claims that are tied to a disease state or that relationship, and then structure function claims. Vitamin C is good for immune support, claims like that we can make depending on the support and the accuracy. Now, all products in the US, particularly food, have to comply, with these applicable enforcement provisions. Namely, food cannot be adulterated, and that really relates to the quality of the food, whether it was produced under sanitary or insanitary conditions. And a food cannot be misbranded. So it can't have any labeling that is false or misleading. So if there were an import entry issue, FDA would charge one of these provisions, either that the product is adulterated because they've done a physical sample of the product, or that it's misbranded, that it's missing some key labeling. And so those are really it kind of boils down to those two issues. And here you can just see types of compliance actions that trigger enforcement. We see a lot of non-compliant product labeling that could impact product safety, non-compliant manufacturing conditions that again would render the product adulterated, non-compliant products such as microbial contamination or other pathogens found in a product, product that's formulated with unsafe ingredients or unapproved colors, and all color additives must be approved for use in that particular product. And there are ones then that require certification and ones that do not. So color additives become its own sort of independent area. And then of course, use of unapproved labeling and marketing claims can render that product both adulterated and misbranded. So there are different ways for FDA to examine, product coming into the US. One is through facility inspections. So they conduct these inspections both domestically and overseas. They have offices everywhere. So simply because you are an overseas manufacturer does not mean you are outside of their reach. They will send inspectors to conduct those facility inspections. And it's very important to be prepared for those inspections to avoid, further escalation of the issue. So for example, recently I had a cosmetic manufacturer with an inspection. They were actually inspected as an OTC drug manufacturer, and they lacked compliance with the OTC drug requirements for manufacturers. They were not, in compliance. And so FDA produced what's called a 483 with inspectional observations. And that company was required to respond to each of the observations that FDA cited in the inspection to avoid, further escalation, which can include shutting down the company. So it's really important to be prepared for those. FDA will also review labeling and marketing claims on websites, review product advertising. They will review product on store shelves, so in retail stores. They will review products at ports of entry. And then, of course, if they receive consumer and competitor complaints, they will take those into consideration and investigate the products. We'll talk just briefly about the differences between an import detention versus a refusal and an import alert, since many of the products we are discussing here, I imagine, will be exported from Greece to the US, and you may experience some of these issues. So an import detention relates to a specific entry. And again, the basis is going to be one of adulteration or misbranding. So for example, FDA can review a food product and determine that there is a violation either of a manufacturing standard, a quality standard, again, or a labeling standard. And they would detain that entry in that shipment. So that product cannot enter the US market unless the violation is overcome. And so you have about 14 days to respond to a detention notice in which you provide evidence that the product is compliant or can become compliant. And then that product could get released. If FDA finds that your response is not adequate, then they would issue what's called an import refusal. And that product would now be, it's considered final agency action, and that item must be exported or destroyed within 90 days. So it needs to be sent back to Greece, or it needs to be destroyed. But you cannot bring that product into the country. So that's the difference between a detention and a refusal. Now, an import alert is where there are a series of violations, okay? It's sort of like, you get a slap on the wrist for an import detention. And if you are a repeat offender, meaning you keep doing this and you have violations that add up, then FDA will put you on what's called an import alert. And that is a red list where every product coming in would be stopped by FDA until you show that the product is compliant. So that's sort of just an overview on the relationship between those different items. Now, in terms of an import alert, we'll get into this because I saw about 22 import alerts affecting Greek exporters. And so I just wanted to cover this for a minute. This is an enforcement tool that allows potentially dangerous products from entering the market. It shifts the burden to the importer to demonstrate that the product is compliant. Naturally, this causes delays and upsets the business flow, and also questions where a company is going to source products or ingredients. It can affect manufacturers, shippers, or growers, and it means that all future shipments of a product will not be allowed entry into the US until the importer demonstrates it's in compliance. Again, here you can see the items that can affect a business: the inability to fulfill orders, losing consumer confidence, difficulty in getting to the marketplace, and obviously not having a good relationship with the agency. And so there's different indications for why a company would be placed on import alert that are identified here. And I'm happy to share the slide deck with the participants for reference, so you can sort of track this and have this as your reference tool. And so here there's just different types of alerts. You have them by country, by manufacturer, by shipper, or country or worldwide. So there could be a detention without physical exam of soft cheese from France. So that covers an entire region. It could be for a specific company, a manufacturer, a shipper again, or altogether for a category. So you can see the different examples here. So there is a process to be removed from an import alert that we can assist with. It's to review documentation, including testing and sampling protocols, and then drafting a petition for removal. This process usually takes about 6 to 8 weeks for drafting, depending on the materials available with the company. And then FDA would issue a notice of removal from the import alert. The benefit to this process is that you are no longer on this red list. And so all products coming in would not be automatically detained. You would not have to do independent testing. And so those costs would certainly be avoided. We'll skip this over. I next want to talk about advertising just for a minute here. So FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, has jurisdiction and shared jurisdiction with the FDA to prevent deceptive and unfair practices, which includes false and misleading marketing claims. This covers all types of products and all forms of advertising. And so FDA has primary authority over claims made in labeling, but then FTC has primary authority over advertising. So the key takeaway with respect to FTC jurisdiction is that advertising must be truthful and not misleading, but that the product must be substantiated. So if you are making claims that your product, for example, a cosmetic product, can provide a benefit within a certain period of time, within 24 hours, you will have more youthful, glowing skin. Within 1 week, you will notice X benefit. Those types of claims must be supported either by science or literature. And so the agency that regulates that is FTC. This can include both express and implied claims. Testimonials are treated as part of advertising. So if you have a testimonial on a social media platform, that's considered as part of your advertisement. And disclosing that it is that there could be varying results, et cetera, is not considered adequate. We'll jump now to FDA's inspection authority. Like we said, FDA can inspect facilities, both domestic and foreign. And the food facility registration requirement really triggers your consent for an inspection. So by registering with FDA, a company is consenting, to an FDA inspection. These can be routine inspections, so usually every couple of years, or it can be for cause, based on some occurrence, whether there was a product complaint, something in the marketplace. There are also FSVP inspections for parties designated as that, in the US. And so there are certain things to take note of before, during, and after an inspection. How to prepare before the compliance officer arrives, the investigator arrives, how to conduct yourself during the inspection, and then best practices for after. Before the inspection, it's collecting all the documentation, identifying if you have a photography policy, identifying the conference room where you would take the FDA inspector, and really making sure that all of the GMP requirements are in place, that you have, standard procedures. During the inspection, it's obviously working with the investigator to answer questions. There are, guideposts on signing affidavits, and again, this photography policy. And if you have, received an inspection or would like to be inspection ready, I can talk more with you offline on the specific areas to take note of. And then, of course, after the inspection, you may receive follow-up. So it might be observations. It might be, hopefully, if not as severe, but it could be a warning letter if there were repeat violations that were not addressed. And you see that here in terms of results. We'll now move on to, briefly, FDA's regulation of cosmetics. I know there are, a number of companies in our audience that are in this space, and so we just wanted to touch on this briefly. So FDA regulates cosmetics. These products are defined as articles that are intended for cleansing, beautifying, and promoting attractiveness or altering the appearance. It is different than, of course, drug products, which are indicated to diagnose, cure, mitigate, treat, or prevent disease, or to affect the structure or any function of the body. And so here you can see a little breakdown of the difference between FDA's regulation of a drug versus cosmetic. So we'll go through this. An OTC drug is a monograph or product-specific product that does not require, that does require pre-market approval. in terms of compliance with the monograph. There is an evaluation of safety and efficacy. There is compliance with GMP requirements. All establishments and products have to be registered, and serious adverse events need to be reported. So the key there is that you are complying with a monograph or product-specific regulation, to market that product. And there are stricter requirements on safety, efficacy, registration, of course, and GMP. With cosmetics, there's no pre-market approval required. There's no pre-market clearance of safety or efficacy, and the GMP guidelines are only voluntary. They're recommended, but there's nothing mandatory. In contrast, there's no mandatory registration obligation, and there's no mandatory adverse reporting obligation. And so you can see here that cosmetics are more loosely regulated than over-the-counter drugs. But I want to mention that even though FDA's treatment of cosmetics is different, there's certainly in the US, the climate is such that there is a strong industry standard to meet, in terms of working with retailers, the customer demands, et cetera. So on the FDA side, it's less, but still on the consumer interest and industry side, I would say it's still comparable, in terms of product safety. Okay, I think my screen just froze, Theo. Let's see here. Okay, that's all right. It's going to freeze on this screen, but that's quite all right. We'll continue. So it's important, I think, in terms of the next couple of slides, just touch on the importance of really ensuring that your overall control of the supply chain, whether it's a food product or a cosmetic or really any other area, is maintained very strong, and that you are able to identify the product category and identify the compliance requirements. I can't go through the rest of the slides because we just froze, but if there are any questions, feel free to contact me, and Theo, perhaps we can put up my contact information from the beginning slide or send that across at a convenient time. So thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you all, and I look forward to discussing further.
Well, thank you very much, Sally. That was indeed a very good and very broad description of what is needed to be compliant with FDA requirements. And Theodoros will ask the audience for questions. And thank you very much on behalf of the Chamber of Commerce for your readiness to participate, to be the keynote speaker in this webinar. And I think what you have delivered today to the audience is a very important message that they have to stick on that in order to be ready for entering the US market. Theodoros.
Thank you very much, Shelley. Well, Mr. Zoglu had some pressing engagements with related to the visit of the Prime Minister in Washington, D.C. So he greets you all. Now we have only one question that has not been answered, and that relates to the meaning of OTC. Shelley, could you handle that?
Yes. So OTC, I'm sorry about that. It means over-the-counter drug. So in the U.S., there are products that would either be considered an over-the-counter drug, an OTC drug, or a new drug, and would need to follow a new drug application. So the OTC route there are monographs that if you comply with the monograph, there is no additional pre-market approval requirements. And if it's outside the monograph, it might be considered a new drug that requires a very separate process. But by and large, a lot of the products in this space would comply with an OTC drug monograph. And we can certainly assist with identifying that monograph and your requirements and ensuring compliance.
Thank you very much. Any more questions from the audience?
I see a question on CBD.
That's right, yeah.
Yes, so we have a CBD team that assists with those questions, but CBD, there's certain ways that it can be used in the US. Primarily with drug products, it could be used as an inactive so long as no claims are made about its indications. And so if there are questions about its use in terms of a food, cosmetic, drug product, I encourage you to ask specific questions about your particular product and claims. But it is allowed, and we are very involved in its regulation and its ongoing developments. Yes, absolutely. Happy to share the presentation.
Okay. So there are no more questions. They are all looking forward to get your presentation, Shelly. So with your permission, we could give it to any third party that wishes to have a copy of it.
Yeah.
Would you agree on that?
Yes, Theo, no problem. I'll send you a copy of it, and I'm happy for you to forward it to the audience.
Okay. Thank you very much for that. I wanted to make the same claim to Mrs. Garg. Thank you.
Thank you for being with us. Well, Ms. Garg had to get up and get connected at 6 o'clock in the morning, her time. So we sincerely thank you. And I'm sure that the members of the chamber will be happy to get in touch with you for further assistance.
Sounds great. Well, thank you again for everyone's time and for joining. I really appreciate it. I really appreciate TCCI for really organizing a very smooth and smooth seminar, and what I hope to be very helpful for Greek exporters. I think it's amazing that you as a trade group are so vested in your companies and your exporters to provide them with the information and tools that they need to really ensure that there are no trade barriers. So I commend you all, and I thank you for having me join today's session.
Well, we have to thank you, Shelley, for your readiness to be the keynote speaker in this webinar, to be a keynote speaker at 6 o'clock in the morning. That is something that I appreciate very much. Once again, before saying goodbye, once again, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Take care, everyone. Good to see you, and look forward to connecting again soon.
Thank you, Shelley, once more for a very thorough presentation. Thank you.
Okay. Be well. Bye-bye.
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 Να ευχαριστήσουμε και όλους τους συμμετέχοντες. Φυσικά μπορείτε να δείτε όλοι ξανά την παρουσίαση, όλη την εκδήλωση, όπως είπα, στο κανάλι του ΕΒΕΘ στο YouTube. Στη διάθεσή σας, οτιδήποτε χρειαστείτε, μέσω email, να επικοινωνήσουμε μαζί σας. Ευχαριστούμε
και
πολύ.
Αν υπάρχει κάποια ένδειξη από το ακροατήριο, από όσους παρακολούθησαν ή οποιοδήποτε άλλο, ότι χρειάζεται κάτι άλλο για το οποίο μπορεί να κάνει το Επιμελητήριο με αντίπεινα με τα webinars, να μας το γνωρίσουν για να προσπαθήσουμε να βρούμε τις κατάλληλες συνδέσεις και για να κάνουμε ένα σεμινάριο ή webinar που να έχει πραγματικά, όπως αυτό το σημερινό, να δίνει την περαιτέρω χρήσιμη πληροφόρηση στους παρακολουθούντες στα μέλη μας και στα μέλη μας.
Επίσης, να θυμίσουμε ότι έχουμε άλλες δύο εκδηλώσεις, μία την ερχόμενη Τετάρτη και μία την μεθερχόμενη Τρίτη. Η πρώτη είναι σε συμβάσεις, διεθνείς συμβάσεις, κατάρτιση δηλαδή διεθνών συμβάσεων, τι πρέπει να προσέξει κανείς για να μην βρει τον πελάτη, να το πω λίγο λαϊκά. στη συνέχεια, όταν κάνει μια συναλλαγή, και αμέσως μετά πώς μπορούμε, όταν στραβώσει μια συναλλαγή, να την επιλύσουμε εξοδικαστικά. Στην τελευταία εκδήλωση πια που έχουμε στην 3η 31 Μαΐου, θα ασχοληθούμε με θέματα χρηματοδότησης εξαγωγών, μέσα από διάφορα προγράμματα που έχουν αναπτύξει οι ελληνικές τράπεζες, καθώς και ασφάλιση εξαγωγικών πιστώσεων, κάποιες εξειδικευμένες ορολογίες που είναι για τους νεοεισερχόμενους στον εξαγωγικό στίβο, και κάποια πάλι προγράμματα τα οποία έχουν να κάνουν με ασφάλιση συναλλαγών. Ευχαριστούμε πάρα πολύ. Στη διάθεσή σας ό,τι χρειαστείτε. Ευχαριστούμε, κύριε Βλαχογιάννη.